The rusty chain-link fence rattled violently as I vaulted over it, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. The sound of heavy panting breaths behind me spurred me on, fear coursing through my veins like liquid ice. I didn't dare look back. I knew what was chasing me, and the very thought of it made my skin crawl. My name is Max, and I never believed in monsters. At least not until tonight. It all started when I decided to explore the abandoned Trenton steel factory on the outskirts of town. As an urban explorer and photographer, I couldn't resist the allure of the decaying industrial complex, its rusted machinery and graffiti-covered walls promising a goldmine of haunting images. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the crumbling parking lot. The fading light painted the sky in hues of deep purple and blood red, an ominous prelude to the horrors that awaited me. As I approached the main entrance, a chill ran down my spine. The massive steel doors hung askew on their hinges, as if something had forced its way inside with inhuman strength. Shaking off my unease, I slipped through the gap, my camera at the ready. The interior was a maze of shadowy corridors and cavernous production halls. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating eerie patterns on the debris-strewn floor. I moved deeper into the factory, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. As I rounded a corner, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. In the far corner of the room, hunched over something I couldn't quite make out, was a massive fur-covered figure. My mind reeled, refusing to process what I was seeing. It looked like a wolf, but it was far too large, its proportions all wrong. Suddenly, the creature's head snapped up, and I found myself staring into a pair of glowing yellow eyes. A low, rumbling growl filled the air, raising the hair on the back of my neck. The thing rose to its full height, easily 7 feet tall, and I saw what it had been crouching over. My stomach churned as I recognized the mangled remains of what had once been a human being. Terror gripped me, paralyzing my limbs. The werewolf, for what else could it be, took a step towards me, its massive jaws dripping with fresh blood. In that moment, survival instinct kicked in, and I turned and ran. I sprinted through the factory, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its claws scraping against concrete and metal. I ducked under fallen beams and leapt over piles of rubble, desperate to put distance between myself and the monster. As I burst out of the factory and into the moonlit night, I realized with growing horror that I was trapped. The fence surrounding the complex was too high to climb quickly, and the werewolf was gaining on me. In a split-second decision, I veered towards a cluster of old storage containers, hoping to lose my pursuer in the maze-like arrangement. I weaved between the rusted metal boxes, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The sound of rending metal filled the air as the werewolf tore through the containers like they were made of paper. I caught glimpses of fur and flashing claws as it drew ever closer. Rounding a corner, I found myself face to face with a dead end. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I frantically searched for an escape route. That's when I spotted it, a narrow gap between two containers, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Without hesitation, I dove for the opening, scraping my arms and shoulders as I forced my way through. I emerged on the other side just as the werewolf slammed into the containers, its furious roars echoing in the night air. The metal groaned under the assault, but miraculously held. I didn't waste a second. I ran toward the fence, adrenaline giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. As I reached the barrier, I could hear the containers finally giving way behind me. With a desperate leap, I grabbed the top of the fence and hauled myself over, tumbling to the ground on the other side. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed awkwardly, but I forced myself to my feet. The werewolf was mere yards away now, its massive form silhouetted against the moon. I limped as fast as I could towards the road, praying for a passing car or any sign of help, but the night remained silent and empty. I could hear the creature's heavy footfalls growing closer, feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. Just as I thought it was over, that I would meet the same grisly fate as the poor soul in the factory, headlights appeared in the distance. Hope surged through me, giving me a final burst of speed. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The car, an old pickup truck, screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, an elderly man with a weathered face, took one look at me and then at the monstrosity behind me, and his eyes widened in shock. "Get in," he yelled, reaching across to fling open the passenger door. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove into the truck just as the werewolf's claws raked across the rear bumper. The old man floored the accelerator, and we peeled away in a cloud of dust and gravel. In the rearview mirror, I could see the creature standing in the middle of the road, its howl of frustration fading as we sped into the night. As we drove in stunned silence, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My hands shook uncontrollably, and I could feel the onset of shock setting in. The old man glanced at me with a mixture of concern and grim understanding. "You're not the first to run into that thing," he said quietly. "Been happening for years now. Nobody believes the stories, of course, but those of us who've seen it, we know the truth." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? My entire worldview had been shattered in a single night. Werewolves were real, and one had nearly killed me. As we drove into town, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The creature was still out there, hunting in the shadows of Trenton. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't simply walk away. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a terrifying journey that would push me to the very limits of sanity and survival. The old man dropped me off at the local hospital, insisting that I get checked out. As I watched him drive away, I couldn't help but wonder how many others had encountered the Trenton werewolf and lived to tell the tale. More importantly, I wondered what it would take to stop the beast before it claimed more victims. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I couldn't shake the image of those glowing yellow eyes, the sound of claws on metal. I tried to go to the police, but they dismissed my story as the ravings of a drunk or a prankster. Even my friends thought I was losing my mind when I told them what had happened. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew I had to do something about it. I threw myself into research, scouring the internet and local libraries for any information on werewolves and the history of Trenton. What I found chilled me to the bone. There had been a string of unsolved murders and disappearances in the area going back decades, all centered around the full moon. The official reports blamed wild animal attacks or serial killers, but I recognized the telltale signs of the werewolf's handiwork. As the next full moon approached, I knew I had to act. I couldn't stand by and let more innocent people fall victim to the monster. Armed with silver bullets, ordered from a specialty ammunition maker who probably thought I was crazy, and a determination born of fear and righteous anger, I made my way back to the abandoned factory. The night was overcast, the full moon playing hide-and-seek behind the clouds. As I approached the fence, memories of my previous encounter flooded back, nearly overwhelming me, but I steeled myself and pressed on. This time, I was prepared. This time, I was the hunter. I slipped through the same gap in the doors, my silver-loaded pistol held tightly in my sweating hands. The factory seemed even more ominous now, knowing what lurked in its shadows. Every creak of metal and whisper of wind set my nerves on edge. For hours, I searched the complex, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Just when I was beginning to think the werewolf had found new hunting grounds, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of claws on concrete. I spun around, my heart in my throat. There, at the end of the corridor, stood the creature that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. It was even more terrifying than I remembered. Saliva dripped from its razor-sharp fangs, and its eyes gleamed with feral intelligence and hunger. For a moment, we stood frozen, predator and prey locked in a deadly stare. Then, with a bone-chilling howl, the werewolf charged. I raised my gun, squeezing off shots as the monster bore down on me. The silver bullets found their mark, eliciting yelps of pain and rage from the creature. But it wasn't enough to stop its advance. In seconds, it was upon me. I felt a searing pain as claws raked across my chest, sending me sprawling to the ground. The gun clattered away, lost in the darkness. As I lay there, certain that my end had come, the werewolf loomed over me, its hot breath washing over my face. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature hesitated, tilting its head as if confused. In the dim light, I saw something flicker in its eyes. A spark of recognition, of humanity. And in that moment, I realized the horrible truth. The werewolf was someone I knew. Before I could process this revelation, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Someone must have heard the gunshots and called the police. The werewolf's head snapped toward the noise, and with one last look at me, was that regret I saw in its eyes? It bounded away into the shadows. I lay there bleeding and in shock as the factory filled with the shouts of police officers and paramedics. As they loaded me into an ambulance, my mind raced with questions. Who was the werewolf? How had they become this way? And most importantly, how could I stop them without killing an innocent person? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of hospital stays, police interrogations, and sleepless nights. I told the authorities a sanitized version of events, claiming I had been attacked by a large animal while urban exploring. They seemed skeptical, but had no evidence to dispute my story. As I recovered, I couldn't shake the memory of that moment of recognition. The werewolf was someone in Trenton, someone living a normal life by day and transforming into a monster by night. I became obsessed with uncovering their identity, convinced that if I could find them, I could find a way to help them and stop the killings. I started tracking the lunar cycle, correlating it with local events and the movements of people in town. I pored over missing persons reports, looking for any clues that might lead me to the werewolf's true identity. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The transformations seemed to be linked not just to the full moon, but to the old factory itself. Something about that place was triggering or amplifying the curse. As I dug deeper into the history of Trenton Steel, I uncovered dark secrets, tales of occult rituals performed by the factory's original owner, of workers disappearing in the dead of night, of a curse laid upon the land by a wronged Native American shaman. With each new piece of information, I felt closer to solving the mystery, but I also felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier on my shoulders. The next full moon was approaching, and I knew I had to act. I returned to the factory one last time, armed not with silver bullets, but with the knowledge I had gained. As the moon rose, casting its pale light through the broken windows, I waited in the shadows, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Right on cue, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. But these weren't the heavy footfalls of the werewolf. They were human. I held my breath as a figure came into view, and my blood ran cold as I recognized them. It was Sarah, my next-door neighbor. The quiet librarian I had known for years was the Trenton Werewolf. As I watched in horror, Sarah's body began to contort and change. Bones cracked and reformed, fur sprouted from her skin, and her face elongated into a canine muzzle. Her agonized screams turned into howls as the transformation completed. In that moment, all my plans and preparations flew out the window. This wasn't just a monster. This was someone I knew, someone who was suffering. As the werewolf that had once been Sarah turned its yellow eyes on me, I made a split-second decision. I stepped out of the shadows, my hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sarah," I called out, my voice shaking. "I know it's you in there. I'm here to help." The werewolf snarled, taking a menacing step towards me, but I stood my ground, talking in soothing tones, reminding Sarah of who she was, of her life in Trenton, of all the people who cared about her. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wasn't working. The werewolf tensed, ready to pounce. But then, miraculously, it stopped. A whimper escaped its throat, and I saw that spark of humanity return to its eyes. What followed was the longest night of my life. I talked until my voice was hoarse, keeping Sarah's human consciousness at the forefront, fighting against the bestial instincts that threatened to take over. As dawn approached, I watched in awe as she transformed back into her human self, confused and terrified, but very much alive. In the days that followed, Sarah and I worked together to unravel the curse that had plagued her in Trenton for so long. We discovered an ancient artifact hidden deep within the factory, a relic tied to the original curse. With the help of experts in occult lore, we were able to destroy it, breaking the power it held over Sarah and the land. The Trenton Werewolf was no more, but the scars it left behind, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. Sarah and I formed a bond forged in the fires of that terrifying experience, supporting each other as we came to terms with the reality of what had happened. As for me, I'll never look at the world the same way again. I know now that there are things lurking in the shadows, things that defy rational explanation, But I also know that even in the darkest of nights, humanity and compassion can light the way. The abandoned Trenton steel factory still stands on the outskirts of town, a silent sentinel holding the secrets of those harrowing nights. Sometimes when the moon is full, I find myself drawn back there, standing at the fence and looking in. Not out of fear, but as a reminder of the night I came face to face with a nightmare and emerged stronger for it. The werewolf may be gone, but its legacy lives on in the stories we tell and the lessons we learn. And as I stand there under the moonlight, I can't help but wonder, what other mysteries are out there, waiting to be uncovered? What other impossible things might be true? One thing's for certain, I'll be ready for them, whatever they may be.